my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I'm here to talk to you today about how to teach really accessible classes. Now, I could have said I'm here to talk to you today about how to teach safe classes or how to prevent your students from getting hurt in your classes. But I don't want to say something that's going to trigger you. And I know that there is this narrative out there in the yoga industry that there's something inherently unsafe about yoga and you better learn anatomy, otherwise your students are going to get hurt in your classes. And I'm here to say that that's not a very helpful narrative to have out there. Now, are there students that get hurt in yoga? I'm sure there are. Are those injuries specifically due to yoga? You'd have to look at each case individually in order to determine what the situation was, what the person's situation was in their body, what their condition was before they did that pose or did that sequence or took that class. What I would rather you focus on is how can you make your classes as accessible as possible in a way that gives your students things to do that are steady poses, that helps them build both strength and flexibility. That's a much more empowering, confident, helpful way to focus on reasons to learn anatomy and how to build sequences and how to cue than being driven by this fear that your students are going to get hurt. So along those lines, let me give you a couple of things that you can do in order to teach in a way that's highly accessible. And one more thing, guess what? When you teach in a way that's highly accessible, the risk automatically goes down because high degree of accessibility means low degree of risk. It's when we start to hone in and create these niche classes and these niche styles and these niche sequences that the risk inherently goes up because it has with it this assumption that you have to have specialized knowledge and the postures are going to be done in a special way. And believe me, that logic even applies to things like restorative classes. Now, am I saying we should never teach those kinds of classes? Absolutely not. I'm just saying that the more you understand about anatomy and the human movement system, the more you'll be able to understand these broad concepts in human movement. And one of them is, the more accessible something is, generally, again, I'm talking about this from a yoga teaching perspective, the less risk that there will be with it. So let me give you an example. In anatomical position, the feet are at hip width distance apart. In mountain pose, the feet are together. So right there, we have the yoga variation in one way and the clinical presentation in another way. Now, you'll notice when the feet are at hip width distance apart, the hips are over the heels. But when I take my feet together, my hips are wider than my heels. So the base is just less steady. It's just less steady for me, and if you try it yourself right now, you'll feel the same thing. So this means one way to increase accessibility in your classes is to look for ways to change things up so that you're teaching things hip width, or at least you're offering that option to people. So that would work well for something like chair pose. It could also work for something like warrior one, taking the feet a little bit wider. It's already part of crescent lunge, which is why something like crescent lunge is a really good pose to start out with over warrior one, because it tends to be a little more steady because it has that wider base. Another thing you can do to increase accessibility in your classes is to avoid taking people to the end range when it comes to variations you might offer them in a posture. A really good example of this is if I'm teaching somebody side angle lunge, and then I take them into the half bind, and then I take them into the full bind, which you can see I can kind of barely get into. So what is the point with that? Well, the point with that is, as I take people into the full bind, I'm taking the shoulder into a lot of external rotation. So in order to do it correctly and safely, I have to have strong external rotators and flexible internal rotators. And if we look at how people posturally are most of the time, they're hunched over, which means that their internal rotators are overly contracted. So if I then present postures like side angle lunge with the double bind, taking people into bird of paradise, things like that, I'm asking their bodies to most likely go beyond the available range of motion they have in their shoulder joint. Now, do I know that there won't be a flexible person here or there in my class that might be able to do it safely? No, but the chances are I'm going to have the bulk of people in my classes that are not going to have that end range flexibility. So with this theme of teaching accessible classes, I'm going to stay more in the middle lane. This might also inform the kinds of poses you put in your sequences. So it might mean you don't teach a headstand or a handstand. You don't teach a Hanumanasana split type variation. There might be some postures that you simply decide don't have enough benefit to outweigh the requirement for the student to have a great degree of flexibility or skill. Now, does this mean you're making your classes really easy? Absolutely not. In fact, what it means is you're really focusing people on a core competence that they probably have and might need some coaching around, or they need to be coached too. But you're not looking to coach people to move to this end range flexibility. You're more looking for them to build competence in this middle lane. And that kind of thing is great when you think about things that we do in yoga that we want to also have transfer skill-wise into our life. All these kind of really fine-tuned esoteric things we do on the mat that oftentimes don't have applicability to just the movement we do during the day doesn't really allow us as teachers to have a lot of impact. But when we teach in a highly accessible way, it allows our impact to really grow because it means we're teaching people things that have to do with just healthy posture and healthy movement. Now I'm going to say one more thing before I close up this video, and that is one of the best ways you can increase accessibility and decrease risk is to be watching your students. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, absolutely not, my students need me to practice with them, I'm going to burst your bubble here. And what I'm going to say is, the reason you're practicing with your students is not because they need you to, it's because you need to. And one of the most empowering and effective things that you can do to expand your teaching is to stop practicing with your students. To simply stand as I'm standing here now and talk them through the poses. Now I know the next thing you're probably thinking is, well Karen, I'm teaching right now on Zoom because of the pandemic. They absolutely need to see me because of the video interface. And to that I say, not true. You can still teach on Zoom or on whatever video platform you're using the same way you would hopefully be teaching in person by just simply coaching people, teaching people, talking people through the practice. Most of the time, when teachers are practicing with their students, that's because that is the way they are being inspired to provide cues. You should be able to cue in a way that it comes from your knowledge of the practice, your knowledge of anatomy, your knowledge of human movement, not from your own somatic experience being in the poses. And once you drop the practice yourself, practicing with class yourself, you're going to really have an opportunity to see your students, and that is going to allow you to change your cues on the fly, make them more customized and specific to who is exactly in that class. And that is a great way that you can increase accessibility and decrease risk for your students. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I would love to know what you think, so please leave a comment to this video. I'd also like to let you know that all of this, all of what I'm talking about here, in terms of teaching classes with cues that focus on anatomy and action words and learning anatomy for yoga, all of this is covered in my Blueprint Learning Program, which is my signature program for how I teach you anatomy so that you can provide good solid sequences to your students, a lot of what we're talking about here, so you can confidently cue and you can answer their questions and know that you're really being helpful. In order to get on the wait list, I'll include the link on this video, or you can just visit my website, which is barebonesyoga.com, and the link to the wait list is right on the homepage. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss when I release the next video. Namaste.